Welcome.
Welcome to another episode of Tzuzamen. Hi, Tzipi.
Hi, Tzili. And we are here every Wednesday because we need to enrich ourselves. You know, we need to open our minds to new things and to open ourselves to new people, new ideas, because, you know, we would like to grow, actually, you know. So I don't think we have many people who can inspire us as much as Uri.
Hi, Uri.
Thank you.
Uri,
hi, how are you?
Right.
An Israeli documentarist.
No. One of the best, you know, like in the top. And this is not flattering. On the top?
On the top.
On the top.
I think.
Yes, okay.
Well, the main thing is the top.
Yeah, but you have to mention, because you will have to refer to it sooner or later, that the range and the wide subjects of documentaries, I'm not speaking about, you know, that he was part of this famous, most important investigating program in Israel. It's called Uvda, like fact, right?
But many years ago.
Right, but the range of the subject of the films, ranging for social, political, philosophical.
Well, basically, Uri is touching all the painful points of the Israeli society with a very sensitive and caring point of view.
Right.
So he elevates all the ugly things to the surface, and is sharing it with everybody.
But you know, but it's also in a subtle way. Tell us what we miss. The moment, and we'll touch it. The moment he talks about people, you know, like the Rambam, like Leibovitz, like those people who got the Nobel Prize. The moment he touches and makes films about them, it's not just enriching us, but it also shows us what we miss in our life. But really, let's face it. Today we are in the middle of the operation.
But you didn't let him talk about it even.
He will.
Let him say something.
He will.
Something.
No, he will wait because he has to go in depth. So where do you want to start about our situation now, about Lud?
Well, maybe we should start with Lod and then go to other things. And I just want to mention that we are in the midst of the war in the Middle East. And Uri made a film about one of the cities that is a mixed city. There are many cities in Israel that you have mixed population between Arabs and Israelis. It's either they live together or next to each other. Some of the cities, the Palestinians were there before 1948, before the beginning of Israel, and they were chased out. Some of them left, some of them stayed, some of them were pushed back. And they live together till now. And for those who don't know, basically Israel is a puzzle of mixed population between the Arabs and the Jews, and it's very hard to divide it and to cut it to pieces because you have villages all over and mixed population in the cities. Lod is the city next to the airport, the Ben Gurion airport of Israel. And it has like 70% Jews and 30% Palestinians. And Uri made, a few years ago, he made...
What do you mean few years, like 9 years ago?
Yeah, a few years ago, he made a documentary about the problems in that city. And nowadays, the riots in the city, like in many other cities in Israel, is just... the level of the riots and the hatred and the violence is beyond everything that we remember.
So let him now talk about, you know, how we feel about this deja vu.
Okay, so good morning, good afternoon. I'll open sadly that 500 meters from here, about 40 minutes ago, a person was killed by a missile strike from Gaza, which makes this whole ordeal surrealistic in a way. Yeah. But having said that, you can't really compare it to what the people in the Gaza Strip and around the Gaza Strips, Jews and Palestinians on both sides of the border are going through. We have maybe 1 or 2 airstrikes a day for a week or so. I believe it will dissolve in a while because now Bibi can make a government, so he doesn't need the war. So that is one important thing to say. And
it just, hold on.
sad,
I think it's important to say about Bibi that basically it looks like he's going to get the vote to build a new government, which allows him again and again and again to abuse the Israeli system.
And not only that, he's directly responsible to what's going on.
I'm not sure that he will get the vote. I think more surely there will be a fifth election. And this standstill, this crazy standstill that is really destroying Israel will continue at the least till September or even more. But having said that, and having said what happened around here in the neighborhood and in the south, I think that our gravest problem is what is going around inside Israel between the Palestinian and Israeli citizens and the Jews, mainly the mixed cities, but not only. And this is, I think, one of the gravest moments, the hardest moments in Israeli history. I think we're on the verge of becoming Bosnia here.
Nice.
This thing that is going around in Lod, in Akko, in Ramle,
Jaffa.
in Haifa, in Jaffa,
Jerusalem.
is unprecedented, and it's very, very worrying. As you said, me and my partner in that work, Eyal Balachsan, we made a series that was called Lod Between Hope and Despair, which was a series of, we worked 5 years in Lod.
Wow.
We made two seasons of, all in all, 11 chapters. And also we made a feature film there that it's called Town on a Wire, which, you know, was made out of all the parts. And we're in close contact with that city ever since. I mean, we finished shooting in 2015, and the last debut was in 2017 of the feature film, but we're still in close contact with Jews and with Palestinians in Lod. And these are very, very troubling and sad days for me personally. I can only, the amount of phones and calls and messages I'm getting from that city, from Jews and from Arabs, and the sheer fear and hatred that you feel coming out of that city, not only there, but there it's maybe the center key of the thing is really despairing and depressing, and I'm not sure yet how we will come out of this situation. It's really, I think it's one of the most severe threats that Israel has encountered, much more than the Hamas,
right.
And the missiles and all these things, not, you know, putting down for a minute the suffering of our citizens in the South, which are enduring this thing for many years. But this is really dangerous to the existence of Israel, I think, because we're seeing unexplainable, they are explainable, but I think we're in a state of shock, all of us, of what's emerging there in these.
But you know, you made your film, and actually we see everything in your film, and I really recommend everybody to watch it. But being so close to these people and keeping in touch with them, what is your perspective? Why? How come we came to this point?
But hold on, I think that we need to explain new things because we have many ingredients to this situation, and it's not black and white.
But you can explain it.
No, but it all comes together, and even the focus of the film is basically on the crime scene in this city, which is between
just part of it.
No. But I'm saying there are many angles to this.
Yeah, but
situation.
There is a very poignant part of it, which leads to what we talk about.
Yeah, but we have to explain because many people don't know what we're talking about, especially outside of Israel. There is the situation between the Hamas in Gaza and Israel, and the rocket throwing and the attacks, and this is one thing. There is the situation between the Palestinians in Israel forever with the Israelis they don't have the equal life or the level of equal life like the Israelis. We are in the day today is the Nakba day and the month of the Ramadan, and there's so many, and there's crime as well. So these are many ingredients, and now Uri, you can just focus on everything else or everything together.
Well, all these ingredients that you mentioned, they're all in our series, in our work. I mean, they're all part of this big, enormous and depressing puzzle that, you know, these all kinds of the storylines that have all joined into this gigantic blast that we're encountering in the last week. I mean, we have, first of all, we have Ramadan and all the things that around the Temple Mount, Al-Aqsa, and all those things that really, that's on one hand. On the other hand, we have the elections in the Palestinian Authority, which were canceled. Mm-hmm. On the third hand, we have the situation, the inner situation in governmental and coalition problems in Israel.
Right.
You can add to that the ongoing crime situation in the Palestinian Arab society in Israel, which has reached peaks that are devastating before this.
And nobody take care of it.
Nobody take care of it for years, and it reached a state of chaos in the last years that people without regards to Israelis and Jews, I mean, Palestinian citizens in some places are afraid to walk the streets because they might get shot.
And against women.
Against women and against families, everything, yes, and we have we have the whole thing around Netanyahu and all the demonstrations that are going on for almost a year now against his staying at the prime minister office.
But also he's constant, you know, sending people against the Arabs.
Inciting everybody against everybody. It's not only Jews and Arabs, it's Jews and Jews.
Netanyahu is manipulating everybody, and he sends everyone against everyone, and he takes advantage of all the weaknesses, and he's fueling the situation non-stop.
Yeah, but you know,
now you take all the. But you take all these factors. You take all these factors and you mix them together, and you get this toxic reality that we're facing today, and it just blew up in our faces. Now, if you're talking about Lod specifically, Lod has a few problems that really build it up this big problem. Lod, if we go back to 48, the story of Lod is a tragic story. In 48, the original settlers of Lod, which were Arab Palestinians, were deported by the Palmach, by Yitzhak Rabin and Yigal Allon.
Right.
There's the famous story which Yitzhak Rabin and Yigal Allon came to Ben Gurion and asked him, what should we do with the Arabs of Lod and Ramle? And he just did something like that with his hand, and they deported all of them. There was also a massacre in the mosque, in the Hamash mosque in Lod, where 70 people were killed. And in 48, Lod was left empty, almost empty. Almost none of its original residents still kept the town. And what happened from there? Happened two developments at the beginning. One, what you call dachelim, which are inside refugees, Palestinian Arabs who were scattered around the country, were all drawn to places like Lod, like Ramle. You could be, till today, you can meet people in Lod who came from Majdal, which is Ashkelon, or Aker, which is Ekron, and they were all drawn to there. In parallel to that reality, and you can read it in Yoram Kaniuk's book Tashach. He describes it very vividly.
Tashach is the Hebrew year for 1948.
So 48, this is the original sin. You're talking about the original sin or the lack of acknowledgement.
I'm saying another
this
thing.
This is the build-up of the situation.
Yeah, with those Dachelim, with those Arab Palestinian refugees from other towns in Israel, arrived people from the camps in Europe. Many people from the camps of Europe, and Kaniuk, who was a Palmachnik, who was a soldier, that described them getting out of trucks in the middle of July with long coats and just entering houses and possessing houses, sitting there. Surprisingly, and a few years after, arrived the North African immigration of Jews from Morocco and Tunis, and also settled in Lod. Surprisingly, in the first years till the 1970s, all these three communities thrived together. There was a very peaceful and nice and small town that everybody had nothing, but there was harmony and there was coexistence. In the 1970s, things began to change. First of all, it was a little later. A lot of Bedouins started to arrive and live in Lod, out of Lod, but in its parameters. And then another thing that happened was that a couple of years forward, Lod suffered a severe corruption of its municipality. And parallel to that, two big cities were erected in quite close. Modi'in, which is a very big city, and Shoam, which is a suburb. Like these places drew all the middle class citizens from Lod and from Ramleh, all the people
that could
who
go.
had some money. It wasn't that expensive then, but everybody for the middle class, people who worked in the airport, who worked in the aeronautic industries, moved there, most of them.
It was an
upgrade
for the people.
Yeah, and they said, why should I still live in this town, which is starting to be corrupt and starting to be not nice? And they moved out.
Yeah.
Yes, another thing that happened that with the withdrawals of Israel, with things like Oslo, and afterwards the Itnatkut from Gaza, the disengagement from Gaza, a lot of collaborators, people who worked for Israel in those territories, had to run off because they were afraid, and they were resettled in Lod, many of them, because in Palestinian villages in Israel, they won't accept them. Also in Jewish cities, nobody will take them. So the only place was the places which were literally becoming the backyard of Israel, which was places from Lod, like Lod. And then in the 90s, you can see a city that is in complete catastrophe. The municipality was bankrupt. The country had to select a committee that would change the democratic system in Lod and manage the city. Clerks from, people from the government. And then another dramatic thing happened. In those years, a little later, the city was really on the verge of becoming complete anarchy. The Jewish seed groups started to arrive. These are the idealistic people, most of them settlers, Jewish religious people, who saw it as their goal, as their ideal to come and live in Lod.
Resettle.
Now, in those times, resettle in Lod.
Make it Jewish.
We have to say that those people, their way of settling situations is come in, settle down, and push everybody out. Even Jews, if they're not Orthodox, they just take over.
That's a little. That's a very general. I wouldn't generalize like that. I think
I'm
it's more
talking about
complex
these groups.
that.
The ideological.
No. I have to. I think the situation is a little more complex than that, because I have to say that Lod was falling apart. The Jews were leaving it, and these people came and they said, and I don't, agree with them on a lot of things, but they're people with principles. Some of them are very bad in my person, but you have to take for them because they arrived in Lod, and you could see flats, housings there that you could see a Jew living, with an old man with diabetes, living in the 4th floor, was afraid to come out of his house and couldn't even buy medicine. And nobody would take care of him. Now, no liberal leftist from Tel Aviv is going to
do it, and these people will,
Yes, and these people will. So saying that, I think that, they possess a challenge to the Israeli liberal left, which is very, privileged. It's very easy to criticize these people from New York or from Tel Aviv.
I'm not saying
you have to say you have to say all the angles about them.
But
having said that,
I want to say something. Hold on. There is something that I recognize and I know, and there's a mixed message because they're very helpful to the people that they want to help. They do good deeds. They make sure everybody will be fine. They won't be left alone, won't be left with no food or medicine. At the same time, they push away the people that they don't want them around it. And they see it as a goal to clarify the area for their own people. It's a mixed, it's a good and bad in one sentence.
Yes, but
Yeah,
that is
listen, Uri,
important to say.
you're right. It is complex. You're right, and I agree with what we say. But
you can't generalize even in those groups. The different
yeah, there are many
people,
differences.
Yeah, but
and
if I
having
may,
said that, you have to you have to accept the fact that no Israeli liberal, privileged white Israeli will go live in Lod.
you're
Right,
right.
absolutely.
They won't, and these people came by hundreds.
Yes.
They came by now. The problem is, like any gentrification, you can say the same thing about Jaffa, where all the yuppies and all the the
Now,
bourgeois
especially
go and
now.
live. Yeah, these people, without regard for a minute, will leave their religious belief aside. Gentrification builds gated communities and builds elites in cities.
Yes.
And that's right with the religious seat in Lod, but it's also right in Shderot.
Right.
If you go to Shderot and you
Shderot
hear
is
the Jewish
capital of Israel.
if you go to Shderot, which is a Jewish city, and you see the veteran people who live there, the Vatikim, the people who lived there before, they also have complaints to this community because this community is elitistic, it's very close-knitted, and it tries to put their way. Now, what happened in Lod is interesting because in some ways, look at the absurdity. Lod is situated 5 minutes from the airport.
Mm-hmm.
It's near Highway 6. It's on the road to Tel Aviv and Jerusalem.
It's 10 minutes from Tel Aviv.
And it has a train station. All these facilities and it's the backyard of Israel. It was the drug land of Israel. And these people came there and they built it at first, a compound that is very, highbrow in the standard of living. They built a very nice neighborhood. They build all the educational institutions for their kids. They live in a bubble.
Yeah.
And that has effects on the society. The problem was that they not only did they come to Lod, they wanted to live in the middle of the Arab area. That's where the problem begins. Yeah. And not only that they lived in the middle of the Arab neighborhood in the old city, they started, after they put up their neighborhood and their neighborhood flourished, and it was hundreds of families, they started moving in to Ramat Eshkol neighborhood. Now, Ramat Eshkol neighborhood is one of the weakest neighborhoods in Lod, and it has also Jews. It's mainly Ethiopian Jews and old people. Years before, it was a great neighborhood, which most of the people who lives there came from Georgia. But these people prospered and they left that neighborhood, and Arabs came in and bought the houses. There's a lot of governmental apartments there, and that's also the neighborhood which the collaborators come in. You can come in the morning and you see some family from the occupied territory has arrived, and the government agencies just put them in a flat there. Now, this state of chaos, where you have Arab people in really hard poverty next to old Jews and Ethiopian Jews, and these guys who started to come into that neighborhood, now we understand that was explosive.
Yeah, but
now
But Uri, listen, I just want to make sure there are so many, because there are so many things that I would like to share with you about your other films. I want just to make sure that when I look at your film and I look at the situation now, there are all layers. You say complexity is layers, but on the top of it, in your film also, it's the attitude to the Arabs all these years in terms of being Israeli citizens and not. Right. So if you can talk about this, because I think we should, you gave us a wonderful in-depth, what happened there socially and politically and all those layers, but on top of it is how they feel about how the government, the country is treating them.
Yes, of course, but having said that, you can see in these days that the right-wing people, especially on television, are saying about Lod, this has nothing to do with social problems. It doesn't have to do anything with poverty. It's hatred.
Yes.
It's
manipulating.
It's Jews against Arabs, and it's been forever like this. And don't turn it into something else. It's 100 years of confrontation between Jews and Arabs. They hate us, and we can't live with them.
But we also have to say that, moreover, part of what happened in the last over the last week is that outsiders, Jewish and Arabs, settlers and extremists, are moving from town to town to manipulate the situation, not the locals. They come from outside.
Listen, guys, we have to concentrate how we treated them all these years.
No, but I have to say that
because, you know,
I'm aiming to what Tzipi is saying. Because in Lod, there are, you know, the trigger for all this eruption was political, but the ashes under it, the tensions, the rage, the anger is not political in Lod. It may be some people, the extremists from both sides, make it political, but the anger, the despair comes from the poverty, comes from the excessive rights that the settlers have there, and it comes from the police brutality to the Arabs, and it comes from the you know, total desperation of the Arab population because of the crime situation they live in. And all these things together blew up.
We have to explain that over the years, Israel never treated the Arabs as equal citizens, and many things weren't given to them like they were given to the Jewish in Israel. And over time, it came to a point that it's almost impossible for them to run normal life. And they are living in Israel, and they're supposed to be equal. On the other hand, we have to say that some private citizen and organizations are trying all the time to help the population, the Arab population, and fix it in the cities. It's not enough because we don't have the collaboration with the government. And if they do, the government, in every elections, it drops off in between the chairs, and then you have to help it to rise again. So it's a very, very tough situation that is being built up forever.
So what's your prognosis? What do you think will happen now? Because I would like to move to your other films and talk about you as a documentarist, you know, although this is the most important subject. So what do you think?
I'm clueless. I'm very worried. I can't see. Look, it's not like in Jerusalem, for instance, that you have East Jerusalem and West Jerusalem, where, you know, you can put police
line.
Here you have people living door next to door. People who are afraid to go down to the air raid shelter because they don't know what their neighbors will do to them. You have violence from both sides. Look, I think that in Lod, 95% of the people are both sides are people who want to live in coexistence. You always have these 5% of psychopaths and all kinds of you know, people who flourish in situations like that and take control. And you know, if you're talking about winners of losers in this situation that we have now, I think the winner of this week is Itamar Ben-Gvir.
Right.
The
Kahana person who was elected to our parliament, which is outrageous, and it was Bibi Netanyahu who actually put him there.
Right.
And he is extremist, he's provocative, and he actually, I think he, you know, went to the center of what happened in Sheikh Jarrah in Jerusalem and behaved and
started the whole thing.
So I know it's like, yeah, you're right.
This situation a lot of people tear Israel apart to pieces, and this is the worst problem that we have now, more than the
Gaza, right?
You know, there's a lot of people who was you know, debating about, did Bibi plan all this? Was it intentional? And I don't tend to believe that, but I think that what happened, that he made a great effort to put Ben-Gvir inside the parliament.
Very intent.
And he succeeded in that, and Ben-Gvir did the rest of the work, really. I mean, Bibi didn't make a coalition because of Ben-Gvir, but a war erupted because of Ben-Gvir.
But he also put a lot of effort, as we said before, to put us against the Arabs, to put us against the justice.
Well, that's historical, and I want to remind you that, you know, this situation with Gaza is going on for 20 years.
Right.
But we talk about not Gaza.
With Sharon and with it's really depressing, but I really think that Israel is in a very harsh test time now, because all this thing between fellow citizens, Arabs and Jews in Israel, something that erupted, two red lines were crossed this week that is unprecedented. First of all, you have 400,000 weapons in the Arab sector in Israel.
Right. Which can be erected. You can go house to house and get them. If you want.
It's not that simple, but in principle, maybe you have, but these weapons were, for the first time, were drawn against Jewish citizens.
Right.
And that is a watershed against Jewish citizens and Jewish policemen, or Israeli policemen, because till now, one of the things that happened that, they say, okay, they're killing each other, we don't really mind. That was the attitude.
Not our business.
Now, when you have an attitude like that, it turns around you. That's one thing. The other thing was these awful lynches, right, which Jewish citizens made on Palestinians. Both sides made lynches.
But we started.
The Jewish people who lynched Arab people in the street, I'm quite sure that not a few of them, but maybe a lot of them will do it to Jews too. Yeah. I mean, this line that was crossed, I'm afraid that it will also happen to left-wing demonstrators.
Yes.
And this is where we're going to. I mean, if you could see, I mean, that was really shocking. I mean, both sides have a blame. Both sides were violent. Both sides did awful things. But to see this recruitment of people through the phones come, in Haifa, people went around the neighborhood and marked houses with paint that they will know where the Arabs live, so they can come and wreck their houses and beat them up.
Like we did in the West Bank. I was in El Bireh when I saw all these red crosses on buildings.
Yes, but then it was for the army to come in. Yes. It's different than you mark a house that they, some kinds of psychopaths will come and start to burn the houses. And I can tell you that people phoned me from Lod and said, listen, they're going to burn my house. Help me. Above all that, and we'll finish this topic, I think we're paying a dear price now for 2.5 years without a budget.
Yeah,
right. 2.5 years without a commissioner of the police, which was intended by Netanyahu because he didn't want a strong police while he has all these investigations and his trials. And we are paying a dear price for that. We paid it in the Corona with the Orthodox sector. We paid it in Meron. Right. We paid it in the politicized efforts of the police to dismantle the Balfour demonstrations.
And you cannot dismiss all that by having a retaliation with Gaza, because this is a totally different story and it won't go away. So maybe have a...
But it will stop in 2 days or 3 days.
It will blow up in our face every day because it's not handled correctly.
But listen, Uri, I want to ask you something now. You make documentaries. And I don't know how to say it. Not only because I make documentaries, it's because I teach documentaries also. So I can really, we don't have time. I could prove that you are an excellent documentarist. So here you go, and you come with an intent. You come to ask a question about some aspect of reality. And you said 5 years, that's a lot, but I'm sure you did it for other films. And then I wonder, how do you feel about what influence your films have?
That's a tough one. I mean,
sorry.
Look, I think it depends which films, but I think that, for instance, Lod had a big influence when it came out. It had a big influence. It had a big influence on positive sides of this city. A lot of money, a lot of NGOs, a lot of people came into Lod after they saw our films. A lot of government offices came into Lod after they saw the films. A lot of the protagonists in our film evolved because they were seen in the film, and they went into to do big things. But I think it's, you have to be frank with this thing. I think it's the relevance is one thing, but the influence is rather mild. I would say. I'm not pretending to say that there are a few things that I did in my career that I could say that were really influential. I think that the most influential thing I ever did was when I was in Uvda magazine, in Fact magazine, and I was in I was in the team that did the program about the kidnapping of the Yemenite killed children in the 50s in Israel.
Okay.
And it was the first time that the national television decided to take serious the complaint of the parents. And I was in that team, and it was the first time that they got, relevance, and they got the open stage to say what they said, and that was really a watershed.
Right. Just a second, we're talking about the beginning of Israel when babies from Yemenite families disappeared, and the parents were told that the babies are dead because they got sick, they were in the hospital, and they died, and basically they were given to Ashkenazi families with no children.
From after, that's the common.
We are not really, we can make those films, but as far as how much they have an impact, so sometimes you're lucky and it's really fantastic how they change reality, but many times you don't know. But let me tell you something. You also look around to the Israeli society, coming from making films on the Rambam, on Leibovitch, on people who got the Nobel Prize, and you look around, and people listen to the Rambam, not all of them, but a lot of them. People listen to Leibovitch, especially before 67, and after 67, also some of them. Who is inspiring us now?
That's a different thing. I just want to say, to close the last topic. In the last few days, I'm getting tons of telephones and messages and mails, and you predicted the future with Lord. You said things 8 years ago that are now, and I'm saying to everybody, what does it help that I said it 8 years ago? I don't want medals. I'm devastated. I can't even sleep because of what's going on in Lord. What does it help that I said it 8 years ago? It doesn't give me any pride. It doesn't give me any comfort that I was right. I didn't believe that it would end up like this. I thought the positive sides. I thought there would be some kind of coexistence. And that is something very important that I have to say. I think the mixed cities in Israel are one of the big tragedies of Israel, one of the big disappointments, because these cities could have been the crown jewel of Israel, because in these cities, Jews and Arabs live not because they chose to live there. The reality put them together, and that's a kind of coexistence that is not, people from Ramat Aviv going to Yafo to learn Arabic, or people, in all kinds of NGOs. These are people who are standing in line at the municipality and in the kindergarten. And if the Israeli governments, for all the generation, had some vision, they would have put the money in those cities, in Akko, in Haifa, in Yafo, in Ramle, in Lod, not in the settlements, not in Modi'in and Shoam. They would put them there, and that people from those cities would have become the greatest ambassadors for the coexistence in Israel. And that is totally missed. Now, answering your question, Tzipi.
Answer me, but with another step. I don't want to disturb you again, because doing those films on the Rambam and Leibovitch.
That's what I want to answer.
And then I go back to my education. They didn't talk about them in school. They didn't talk, the religious was taught in the wrong way.
Yeah.
Just take
I'll say a general thing, and then we'll go into Judaism. I'll say one thing. I'm leaving aside influence, and I'm talking about my contribution. I have a saying that I like to make, I'll say it in Hebrew, maybe you'll translate, television גבוהה לכל נפש.
Oh,
high TV for every soul, for every person.
Yes.
High quality.
Because high quality, let's say I like to make television for curious people with no, preliminary, with no knowledge before. I always imagine this.
Right.
I always imagine this guy or this woman coming back from work or on the weekend, opening the television and say, I want an hour now to see something that is worthwhile, something that I will be challenged in the mind, not the usual garbage that I watch all day, not the news or not the reality. I want to see something challenges that I will earn something from that. And that is where I come in, because I know that when I make the Rambam or Leibovich or the Nobelists or Kingdoms, which I made, I know that these people will see something that is worthwhile, and I know that they will see it only once. So that's always the modus. You know, you have to make something that on one hand is intelligent, and on the other hand is enough enjoyable that the people will consume it in an hour, because they won't see it 3 times. So that's my ideology in one part of my creative world. And in that thing, I did the Novelist, and I did Leibovich, and I did the Great Eagle, the Rambam, and I did the Kingdoms. And I have my activist branch, which is different. But in those series, I really, you know, I come from a curious part of, you know, these things make me curious. And when I started, you know, seeking topics in the Jewish world, in all those topics, I discovered that I don't know anything. I mean, I learned I am a product of the secular education in Israel, and all these topics about Jews, about Jewry, about Jewish tradition, about religion, were the most boring and irrelevant things I learned in my education, especially because they were given to Orthodox people to teach the secular people, because secular people say that's theirs, let them, that's their mandate, that's their reservation, let them teach it. And that is the most
based around the holidays.
Yes, and that's the most boring, you know, Tushba, all those things that we studied was so boring. And suddenly I come into this world through Leibovich that opened the door for me. And I discover a fascinating dramatic history.
This is Professor Yeshayahu Leibovich, a big philosopher that was like a prophet in Israel.
He was the first one against the 67. No,
very wise man. Very wise man. Yeah.
He was the Israeli Socrates in some ways. He challenged people, and he also did something that academics today don't do, that he saw it as his mission to go every night out, meet people, doesn't matter, anywhere in Israel, and talk and challenge their minds.
And he predicted what happens today with the Palestinians.
Yes,
we're talking about.
Predicted a lot of things. He had contributions in many angles. You know, another contribution of his was the opportunity opened for religious people to work in sciences, because he explained how there's no connection between science and religion. You can be a religious person, still be a scientist.
And he also did it. He had a PhD.
Yes, seven PhDs.
7 PhDs, right.
So Leibovich opened the way for me, and then afterwards came the Maimonides, the Rambam, which Leibovich was a great follower of his. And suddenly I discovered things of Jewry and Judaism and all the Jewish philosophy, first of all, are not something that is not part of the history of philosophy of the world. It's something living, it's something challenging. All those things that were avoided from us when we were at school. Today it's a bit different, but when I was growing up, it's the same. And also, the way that religious people deal with these topics is not relevant for us. If you read the Rambam, you see that the Rambam goes against a lot of the ways that Jewish persuasive Jews live together today.
But they go to the Kabbalah instead of to Rambam. They go to the Kabbalah, to the mysticism.
Yeah, he was a rationalist. He was a rationalist. He was against going to graves. He was about learning sciences, limudei liba. He was more modern and more revolutionary than most Jewish thinkers of these days. But you know, a lot of the traditional Jews, the religious Jews, especially the Orthodox Jews, and of course the Ultra Orthodox, they just avoid half of his knowledge. I mean, they just study the halacha, you know, Mishneh Torah, one of his books, and they don't study his philosophy. It's even forbidden. And after the Rambam, after Maimonides, I went on and I went to the other side of Judaism, which is the mystical part, with the Kingdoms, which was a trip through Hasidism. And I made a series on Hasidism, which was breathtaking. It was like going into another universe in my case.
And we don't know anything. We hear about it, you know, in a distorted way. And
of course. And every door that I opened, you know, I discovered more about Israel. I discovered more about, you know, all the persuasions and the way we think about each other. I encountered the hostility that people think about us and we think about them. And in the end, it's all people, you know. I finished the series about Hasidism Kingdoms just as the debut, the premiere was a month before the Corona, before the COVID started. And suddenly all those friends of mine that I met for those 3 years, which I did that series, they're all under attack. I mean, they're all victimized for better or for worse. Some of them were, you know, they had their responsibility, but suddenly I'm the guy who, like now, for instance, it's interesting because suddenly I'm the guy in the middle. On one hand, all my secular friends are shouting at me, look at those friends of yours, these black people, what are they doing? They don't give a shit.
yes.
And on the other side, the Hasidis guys are saying, you know, that you are tearing us apart, it's not fair. And the same now with Lod, the same with the Lod now, because people are phoning me and saying, look at, what do you think? What do you know, I suddenly found myself in the midst with two developments in Israeli society. And I think what we encounter, and I think that's the biggest privilege in our work. I mean, because you really get to know people that you would never have known. I love my work. I mean,
yeah, but more than what you just told us is that when you do, doesn't matter fiction or documentaries, eventually you have to confront yourself. You just told me, everybody comes to you and say, oh, you are 4 days out. You have to come and really, it's at the end, you know, it really takes you into a personal journey, and through your journey, you really open the door to us.
What do you say to all these people? In what position you put yourself to answer everybody?
Well, I'll tell you a story. One of the shooting days I was in the Belz Hasidim, and I was in a house and I interviewed the father, and it was a very nice interview. And when we finished the interview, he suddenly got really mad at me. He said, "What is this? You come here and you film us like we're animals, and we're there." Suddenly, really surprising. And why don't I make a film about you? And I said, you're welcome. Mm-hmm. But you know what your problem is? You won't do it because you're not allowed to be curious. Right. If you'll be curious, that's the end of your religion. Yeah. In many ways, you're not brave enough to challenge your curiosity. And that is one of the things that is the most intriguing. And you know, I try very.
Cannot cross.
Yeah, and I try to be very open and understand.
You cannot do anything without doubts.
Yeah, no, and I try to keep an open mind. You know, like now in Lod, or the situation in Lod, I'm really furious. You know, I see what people are going through, but I say it's too early to judge. I mean, even take a family of the Jewish seed group who lives in Ramat Eshkol now, and they had to evacuate their house, run with their baby in their hands. Okay. So, you know, maybe in the first place, they shouldn't have been there, and it's a problematic situation. But now, I mean, they're intimidated. They're frightened to their socks. They left their house. They don't know if their house was burnt or not. And I think the main thing is compassion in some ways. And you know, accepting ideas, being willing to accept ideas that you don't agree with them, or only to present them.
Because we don't have much time, and there are other things you are doing, which for me are very intriguing. You went to the Bedouin city of Rahat, and you started there a documentary class for women. I don't know why I was surprised. I mean, yeah, of course.
Yes, for 6 years almost. Wow.
But this is part of Uris Activism, because Uri is touching, as I said in the beginning, he's touching all the ugly angles and the problems in Israel, and he's trying to.
But also the beautiful, Rambam and those.
But I want to say one of the things that I really like about my profession is that a lot of things happen by chance, mere chance. Like the story of Rahat, I got a phone from my high school headmaster, who I grew up in the South. And my high school headmaster called me after, I think I was 25 years after I finished high school. We were still contacted. And he said, why don't you come to Raat and do
Raat
something
is
in
a
Raat?
Bedouin city
In the south.
The biggest Bedouin city in the south. And he said, why don't you do something in Raat? And they had a cinema class in the cinema department in that high school. He said, do something in Raat. I'll give you everything you need, cameras, editing, anything you need. And I started going around and trying to make a Bedouin film class there. And Bedouins are very suspicious, and they have their very
Tell me about it.
strange way of thinking. And I didn't succeed anything until I met this guy called Majid Kamalat, who was an Afro-Bedouin, which I didn't know a lot about the Afro-Bedouins. And he says, I want you to make a course for women in my NGO, which was called Step Forward. Now, this is an NGO of Afro-Bedouins. At that time, I thought that the story of the Afro-Bedouins, which I heard as a kid in Beersheba, growing up in Beersheba, that they were born as slaves to the Middle East, was some kind of urban myth. And after a few weeks, I discovered that's true. And these women are people who are descendants of people who, until 1948, were slaves of the white Bedouins. And that was a taboo.
Nobody knows.
Which they didn't talk in their families. It reminded me of Holocaust families. I mean, they didn't know their history. And this, modest film class became into 2 films about the history of the Black Bedouins, the Afro-Bedouins. So these things, I think, when you do Tzipi, you know that too. When you write a script for fictional film, everything is, the challenge is somewhere else. Yeah. You have to take the script and, put flesh and blood into it.
Right.
Here, things just happen. And I think that's one of the things I really love about my profession.
Yeah.
Really
I just go by myself. I don't even look for money anymore. I take my equipment for documentaries and I just go by myself, go into my car. And I was in Rahat. I will not go into it. I had to abandon my film because I was endangering the women that I wanted to make. So I decided life is more important than films. Listen, we don't have much time, sure. But it was amazing, the range, as I said in the beginning, the range that you are involved, but we have to come back to the situation today. Here we are talking about all these subjects. Some of them are very relevant. Some of them are spiritual, like the Rambam and Leibovitz. And in any minute now, you can have a siren. And you just mentioned somebody was killed 500 meters from you.
Yes,
this is surrealistic.
But I want to go back with all that to what you said about compassion, because there are subcultures on every side, many subcultures, as small people as we are, many subcultures. People don't know really, and they don't care to go into understanding the culture of each group, and then they don't have compassion and no sympathy.
Right.
And we're talking about people. It's all people. We all get up in the morning the same way. We want to have the same day, and it doesn't work this way. And they demolish every human quality when it comes to another subculture or
but
big culture.
Who gave you these values in school? Nobody told us to respect the other when we were in school. Nobody told me. Sorry, I don't know about. I know about you. We went to the same school. Nobody really gave me those values of respecting and listening and acknowledging the other point of view.
Right.
Nobody ever. I had to grow up and find it myself.
But somewhere you got it. Maybe you got it at home. Somewhere you got. I mean, look. I think that this phenomena you're talking about is in Israel, but it's everywhere else too. I mean, this is the world today.
This is our country, and we are really have to take brains like you and Tzili, which is she's doing quite a bit also, and actually, we have to find something to come out from what she said, compassion and love. And
I hope there will be some hope. I think there's a series now that I just watched, which is fascinating. It's a series by Adam Curtis from the BBC. It's called Got to Get You Out of My Head. It's a 6-chapter series documentary. It's on YouTube. And
Please again?
you got to get you out of my head. I think it's remarkable. I mean, the thesis that he puts down on what happened to the world is crazy. And I think one of the things that I understand, that all the pretense of the liberals in the world, you know, the people who wanted to do good, and all the social structures, all those things that you know were very good in the rhetorics, even of people like Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. But they talked about human rights and equality, and on the other hand, they treated, you know, they were for the tycoons, for the banking systems. People lost trust in democracy, and people are put one against each other. And these developments are not only in Israel; they're right in America. Look what's going on in America. Who would believe the farce that went after the last election in America?
We don't have
what is the truth
in America. They grow your kids to go for and do something for the community. We didn't. Mm-hmm. So
yes, I see a lot of problems in America too. I mean, the only places that you can see something is where look what happened in Israel with the vaccinations. Right. I mean, it's very nice of Netanyahu that he succeeded to getting the vaccination. That's okay, but spreading them around, making such a success of that, wouldn't have happened without the Kupat Cholim, with our NHS. And that is something that has come from
this
a very
is one of the ways that he's using it for his own,
right. Yes.
you know. And the truth is that unfortunately it's all over the world, and Israel is following the United States. Everybody is following the United States in many ways, and depends who is more vocal than the other and who has more voice than the other, and what do they do with this? And I'm not sure that many do the right thing, but we have to mention that there are many private people that do good things all the time.
I hope, but I'm sorry to be so pessimistic today, because I'm seeing our country in a devastating state that I'm not sure. I hope that I'll be wrong, and I hope things can change, but I think we went through something.
It's very frustrating.
Listen,
very frightening.
I'm sorry, we have to finish on this note.
Sad note.
But we do have, but it was really fascinating. And, you know, really, thank you for willing to come and talk to us in the midst of all these missiles falling on Tel Aviv and all over the
country. What else can I do? I mean, there's not too much to do. I won't go out now.
But this is our hope, our resilience. We are here talking to you and to other people in spite of it. So listen, it was
so thank you too. It was great. Nice to talk. Thank you for all the all the nice things you said about me.
Deserve every bit of it, and everybody.
And we're waiting for more and more from you, because we always like to watch it. Thank you, everybody. See you next week.
Bye, Tzili.
And stay safe.
Bye. Chag Sameach also.